greetings, hello, and welcome. Welcome to this reading of The Midnight Court from Bloomsday Montréal, the first of our 10th anniversary year events. I'm Dennis Trudeau, and I'm pleased to welcome all our audience from around the world who've joined us on Zoom. Though we are on Zoom in cyberspace, we do acknowledge that Bloomsday Montréal operates on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has served for many centuries as a meeting place for many First Nations. And we recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of these lands and waters. Our actors are in our virtual backstage, and our technical producer, Edmund Nash, is at the controls, making sure you can see and hear the right person at the right time. But before I hand it over to Edmund and the actors, a few words about the remarkable work we're about to hear today. This year in our 10th anniversary events, the theme is origins. And for some background on the origins of the Midnight Court, I'm joined by Dr. Elaine Bander. Dr. Bander taught literature for many years at Dawson College, and currently she is the Canadian president of the Jane Austen Society of North America. Madam President, welcome, Elaine. So tell me, Elaine, let's start off with the simplest. What is the Midnight Court, and who is this man who created it?
The Midnight Court is an Irish language poem from the late 18th century, just about the time that the penal laws were being relaxed. It was composed by Brian Merriman, a Munster farmer and hedge school teacher of mathematics. He would have taught this poem to storytellers, professional storytellers, who in turn taught it to others. So it survived in the oral tradition as a comic masterpiece in the Irish language for over 200 years, but it was only written down in 1850. It's since been translated into many other languages, and because of its bawdy endorsement of free love and marriage for priests, the Irish censors banned most of the early translations.
Well, we'll get to the bawdiness in a minute. Where, though, does the Midnight Court, this poem, this epic poem, fit into the history of Irish literature, especially poetry, and the oral tradition there?
So Merriman's poem takes the form of an ashleen, or a dream vision poem. Dream vision poems existed in the European tradition really since the beginning of European culture, but the ashleen arose specifically in Munster in the West Coast in the late 17th century after the destruction of traditional bardic culture. And in a conventional ashleen poem, a young man wanders along a body of water and he falls asleep and has a vision of an otherworldly figure from Munster mythology, whose name is usually translated as Sky Woman. And she represents Ireland, often in the form of a beautiful young woman, but sometimes as an old one. And she laments her captivity by the English and either encourages rebellion or looks forward, hopefully, to the invasion by the longed for return of the Catholic Stuarts.
And once Merriman gets his hand on that traditional form, what does he do with it in the Midnight Court?
Oh, that's what's so fun about this poem. Merriman is anything but traditional. In fact, he's subverting the tradition. His poem parodies the ashleen. Instead of a beautiful sky woman, we get a hideous female monster bailiff who drags the dreaming poet to a midnight court presided over by Eival, the mythological fairy queen of County Clare. And instead of a lament of Ireland's captivity, we have a court of women like the medieval Provençal courts of love, complaining that the men of Ireland are not doing their duty, stepping up and marrying and procreating. And the Irish critics have for a long time been commenting on the originality and the subtlety of Merriman's language, which is completely different from the stylized language of the Irish literary tradition. Instead, he mixes up the everyday language of the Munster marketplace with the sophisticated urbane style of Georgian literature. It's pretty clear that he knew Swift and other European writers.
Now, you mentioned the ribald aspect and the sort of sexy aspect of the poem, yet it appears to address or claims to address a serious issue, depopulation in Ireland. Was it really a timely rejoinder to a real problem?
Well, that's a really good question, Dennis. And there's no clear evidence that Ireland was suffering depopulation at that time. In fact, the evidence suggests otherwise. While in the Enclosure Acts in England, Scotland, and Wales meant there was not enough farmland available to sustain peasant families, in Ireland, farmland remained available. There wasn't a shortage. On the other hand, with geographical population shifts, as young men and women moved to the cities and towns to go into service, for example, villages could look depopulated, and Ireland looked like it was emptying out. But there is definite evidence from the time that even then Irish men were marrying very late or never, given that priests were technically at least celibate. We hear something about that in the poem. So a dearth of men for women to marry. And the Irish phenomenon of the lonely bachelor farmer still persists today.
I am intrigued personally by how late the oral tradition lasted in Irish poetry in the countryside. And I wonder how long it was preserved orally, and then what happened when people started to write it down and translate it into English.
Censorship happened. I mean, you could get away with that kind of stuff in Irish on the faraway West Coast. But in 1946, when Frank O'Connor published a full and frank translation, it was banned by the censors. In his preface, O'Connor wrote that Merriman had no influence whatever on Irish life or Irish thought. But more recent literary scholars make a persuasive claim for the enduring popularity of oral Irish performances of the Midnight Court. And by the end of the 19th century, European scholars were commenting on the poem. In fact, Joyce, who did know some Irish, had almost certainly seen the poem in a German journal that he subscribed to. So today, scholars agree that Merriman influenced Joyce. And you could argue that Joyce does to Merriman's poem what Merriman did to the Aisling.
Serves him right. And can you, Elaine, give us then some examples that you see in Ulysses of Joyce inspired by or directly parodying and satirizing Merriman, the set pieces from the Midnight Court?
Yeah, well, for example, the entire Nighttown episode in Ulysses is a kind of Aisling. Um, Bloom and Stephen enter a brothel at midnight, the witch, sorry, the witching hour. And that brothel is a kind of parodic fairyland or otherland. The Madame Bella Cohen is a comic fairy queen, Avol, and her whores sit as a female court in judgment on Bloom, condemning him for failing to have genital sex with Molly, his wife. And Molly herself is a version of Merriman's maiden, whom we're going to see soon, lamenting her lack of sexual gratification, seeking to win back her husband's love, even while betraying him. So both Merriman and Joyce had strong affinities to European literature in general. They each satirized their own specific societies while sending up or subverting earlier literary forms. And they both mix registers, merging pop references with poetic high culture. And of course, they both attacked the church with explicit bawdiness. So, of course, they were both censored for it.
Yes, but the poem is still around and the censors are long gone. And since the middle of the 19th century, many have tried their hand at translating the Midnight Court. What is special about the translation Bloomsday Montreal has chosen for this reading?
Yeah. Oh, we're about to hear the wonderful, unexpurgated 1953 translation by David Marcus. He was a Dubliner who was an important literary editor and a very generous supporter of Irish literature. Merriman's original meter consists of three dactyls and a trochee, excuse my getting technical here, with two-syllable feminine rhymes, which is an inherently comic meter and very hard to duplicate in English. But it would have sounded like, and sorry, I don't speak English, I don't speak Irish, so this is English. It would have sounded something like this: higgledy piggledy jiggledy tea tum, rafferty cafferty lafferty dee dum. So Marcus's translation doesn't follow that exact metrical pattern, but he does have a very bouncy meter. He uses alliteration and rhyming couplets, so it trips off the tongue, and his has been the preferred translation for oral performances like the one, like the reading we're about to hear. And in fact, it's even been used as an opera libretto. And as in modern translations of Beowulf or Aristophanes' Lysistrata, or in the patter songs of modern Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, modern productions, Marcus uses anachronistic contemporary references. They just leap out at you out of the period, but they're used deliberately for comic effect. And I should add that Bloomsday Montréal is very grateful to David Marcus's widow and literary executor, the novelist Ita Daly, for granting permission to use this translation for our reading today.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes peeled, but especially our ears cocked for those anachronisms. I've read it. I know the telephones and fridges are in there. Thank you, Elaine. Very enlightening for us. And we're going to start the fun right now because the curtain's going up. So let the reading begin.
And now, the Midnight Court, the first part, in which the poet, while savoring the pleasures of the great outdoors, is forced to pay a visit to court, where a pertinent case is at hearing.
Beside the water, I often walk, through fields where the dew's as thick as chalk. With the woods and the mountains just in sight, I hang around for the dawn to light. Loch Graney lifts my soul with joy. Such land, such country, what a sky! How silently the mountains rest their heads upon each other's breast. This view would bring the heart to life, be it worn with sickness, age, or strife. In the poorest beggar that ever stood, were he but to glance beyond the wood at the fleet of ducks when the mist is gone, convoyed by a single swan. And the jumping fish that shoot and flash high in the air with a rainbow splash. The blue of the lake and the breakers' roar, tossing and tumbling towards the shore. Birds in the branch that whistle and sing, frolicking fawn that soar in spring. The sound of the horn and a glimpse of the hunt with the pack in chase and the fox in front. Yesterday, shooting from the east and melting away the morning mist, the sun rays flashed and darted by, burning a track across the sky. The nodding branches all around, the very grass upon the ground, the growth so green and flowers so fair, would soon dispel the worst despair. Then, drowsy, dull, and half asleep, I rested where the grass was deep, along a tree-lined shady ditch, where there was room for me to stretch. No sooner had I closed my eyes, my face being covered from the flies, and settled for a peaceful doze, then in my dreams the flies arose and swarmed about me in attack, while I, asleep, could not hit back. Brief was my rest when it appeared. With shocks and shakes the mountains reared. The north was numbed with thunder crash, the waves were laced with lightning flash. Whatever look I chanced to take, I saw approaching by the lake a hellish, hairy, haggard hank, bearded, bony, long and lank. Her height I'd estimate for sure at 20 feet and maybe more. For yards behind she dragged her coat through all the muck and mire and mud. It took some nerve merely to glance upon that ghoulish countenance. For with her ghastly, toothless grin, she'd frighten the life out of anyone. To top it all, in a mighty paw, was the biggest staff I ever saw, and in letters of brass the information that she had a bailiff's qualification. Then, with a gruff and angry shout,
"Get up," she snarled, "you lazy lout. A nice bloody thing, you're stretched in state while the court's convened and thousands wait. And this is no court where the law is bent, like the courts of graft that you frequent, but one that is run by the pure in heart, where virtue, justice, right take part. It's something the Irish could put in their songs, that it takes the best to judge their wrongs. Farms are bankrupt, freedom banned, no law or leader in the land. Right is guyed with mocks and jibes, and hangs there, its mouth stuffed with bribes. The court considered the country's crisis, and what do you think its main advice is? That unless there's a spurt in procreation, we can bid goodbye to the Irish nation. It's growing smaller year by year, and don't pretend that's not your affair. Between death and war and ruin and pillage, the land is like a deserted village. Our best are banished, but you slob, have you ever hammered a single job? What use are you to us, you sissy? We have thousands of women who'd keep you busy, with breasts like balloons or small as a bud, buxom of body and hot in the blood, virgins or whores, whatever's your taste. At least don't let them go to waste. It's enough to make us broken-hearted, legs galore and none of them parted. They're ready and willing for any endeavor, but you can't expect them to wait forever. And as the court has recommended that all this nonsense must be ended, a judge was chosen without delay to hear what both sides have to say. 'Twas Munster's friend and Cragley's queen, Abel of heart and spirit clean, who has been picked to try and see if she can find a remedy. And she has solemnly sworn and vowed that no exceptions will be allowed. She'll stand by the poor and the weak she'll save, and see to it that the rich behave. She won't take long to curb the strong, and right won't have to give way to wrong. She's an eye on the fellows who think they're smart. No spiv or pimp or painted tart will treat the law as a thing of sport, while Abel rules the midnight court. It's assembled in Fakel this very day, and she'd like to hear what you've to say. So up with you now, or else you'll find my boot disturbing your fat behind.
Then, suiting her action to her words, she laughed at me like a sack of spuds, and over the hills I was jet propelled. Till we reached Moy, where the court was held. And there as I stood, before my sight, was a massive mansion ablaze with light, rich and radiantly draped, beautifully built and shaped. There was the Queen, looking kind and mild, as she sat at the bench and sweetly smiled. Hundreds of grim, gigantic guards were stationed at every couple of yards, and packed as tight as a tin sardine was the biggest crowd I'd ever seen. Then there appeared a majestic maid, slender, silky, soft, and sad, with skin as tanned as the golden sand, and she took her place on the witness stand. Her hair was flowing, loose and free, but her face was a picture of misery. Her eyes were fierce and flashed with hate, and she'd worked herself up into such a state that she moaned and heaved and sobbed and sighed, but couldn't speak, though hard she tried. You could see from the flood of tears she shed that she'd much prefer to have dropped down dead than to stand in the witness box alone, exposing her grief to everyone. After a while, as her sobs grew weak, she made a determined attempt to speak, and finding her passion at last was spent, she spoke, and this was her argument.
"Oh, Eva, greetings from my heart. To you who Cragley's ruler art, our sun by day, our moon by night, our only comfort and delight. O strong protector, firm and true, Munster and Ireland depend on you. 'Tis the start of me story, the source of me strain, the reason I'm senseless and almost insane. The thing that has taken and torn me in twain, and has pricked me with plangs, and has blade me with pain, is the number of women, old and young, for whom no wedding bells have rung, who become in time mere hags and crones, without man or money to warm their bones. Thousands are back my evidence, and I speak, alas, from experience. Like me, I can swear there's many another aching to be a wife and mother, but the way we're ignored. You'd think we were wrecks possessed of gender and not of sex. At night, with longing, I'm lacerated. Alone in bed I lie frustrated and damned with dreams of desire denied. My hunger goes unsatisfied. Oh, evil, you must find a way to save our women without delay. For if these men are allowed to shirk, we'll have to force them to do their work. By the time they're ready to take a wife, they're not worth taking to save their life. They're stiff and shrunken and worn and weak. When they mount you, they wheeze and creak. Then if by chance some lusty beau whose beard has hardly begun to grow decides to marry, whom does he wed? Not a girl who is finely bred with fawn-like figure and fetching face, who knows how to carry herself with grace, but a wicked witch or a female Scrooge who's gathered her dowry by subterfuge. My God, there's a goat with a middle-aged spread with one gammy leg and lice in her head, who was married today and has mated me now, while a virgin like me goes untouched by the plough. How is it my beauty no passion awakes? Don't tell me I haven't whatever it takes. My mouth is sweet and my teeth are flashing. My face is never in need of washing. My eyes are green and my hair's undyed, with waves as big as the ocean's tide. And that's not a half, nor a tenth of me treasure. I'm built with an eye to the maximum pleasure. From throat to breast to little finger, I've plenty to make a fella linger. My waist is slim, my back's unbowed, with the best of fittings I'm well endowed. A look at my legs will provide a thrill, and what's between them is better still. I'm not silly, or stupid, or snobbish, or snooty. I've bags of breeding and brains and beauty. And I'm always present to show my face at any funeral that takes place, at match or race or dance or fete, wherever the people congregate. I'm always the one to stick out a mile, dressed as I am in the best of style. My hair is powdered to a T, my cap is starched impeccably. My bright-hued hood has ribboned puffs, the biggest gown you've ever puffed. My bright-hued hood has ribboned puffs, my speckled gown has plenty ruffs. I never forget my rich red cape, for its facing stress my alluring shape. And my apron that's painted with forest scenes will draw the envy of royal queens. High-heeled shoes I always wear, the trimmest, most expensive pair. Brooches, bracelets, and gloves of silk, and lace that flows like a flood of milk. Don't think, by the way, I'm a shy young tot, or a timorous, trembling touch-me-not. Don't think I wouldn't say boo to a goose. You can take it from me, I'm no recluse. Why should I run away and hide? Me face is me fortune, me figure me pride. You can bet your life I'm on parade at every hurling match that's played, at parties, meetings, races, sports. And I've even attended the criminal courts. At mass each week, at the market fair, wherever a man's in sight, I'm there. But after all that, my patience is ending. They've broken my heart. There's no pretending. Whatever I did, it was never enough. The answer was always a rebuff. You'd think by now I'd have some success. But no, I'm still at the same address. And what's worse, I haven't that youthful vigor, And soon I'll be losing me girlish figure. The years won't wait, and I'm afraid I'll die a miserable old maid. But I've been patient much too long. I know a cure that can't go wrong. A drink of herbs decayed I'll make, and this time there'll be no mistake. I'll find a boy with riddles quiz him and raise his passion by hypnotism. I've seen the others play the game, and now it's time I tried the same. Many marriages begin with spells from herbs and apple skin. A mandrake's root I'll find and use, and none will then my charms refuse. Or I'll sow old leaves beneath my dress, and of other ruses you'll never guess. You were all surprised when a certain shrew was recently married. You know who. Well, afterward I heard her say how 'twas done. On All Souls' Day, she feasted off a withered spider that had soaked 6 weeks in a keg of cider. I've waited like this till I'm sick and sore, and I'm damned if I'm waiting anymore. And if you and your court can't help me now, I'll get me a man, and I don't care how.
And now, the second part, in which the poet hears a spirited and somewhat salty speech on behalf of the defense.
Then up there sprung, as if he'd been stung, a wizened old josser, and down he flung his cap enraged and danced on it, till people thought he'd thrown a fit. And though not officially called to reply, he just looked at the girl, and then let fly. Hey, doubts and dangers beat you flat, you jady lump of a beggar's brat. It's no surprise that the sun won't shine, that Ireland's fortunes still decline, that all our rights are swept away, that our cattle and our crops decay. While you and your kind go unrebuked, no wonder our goose is almost cooked. Isn't it known to the biggest gum the breed that you're descended from? And for all your boasting and high-class talk, they never did more than beg and hawk. Your father we can still recall, and well we might, for he robbed us all. A hulking brood of an ignoramus. If we put him away, there'd be none to blame us. Yet you have the cheek to stand there and prattle, who never owned even a head of cattle, dressed to kill in the best of clothes, and a handkerchief held to protect your nose. Others might judge you by what they see, but don't come trying your cod on me. I know what you wear, and upon me oath, your shanks never rustled a petticoat. And in storms, when your dress is blown high and wide, the world can see your bare backside. You talk of your figure, but isn't it grand how stays can be faked with a canvas band? Begob, but isn't she cool as a breeze, in the best of gowns and, if you please, as harmless as Little Red Riding Hood? But she didn't get them from being good. Come on, you might as well admit all that you'd to exchange for it. For you weren't elected a fashion queen, and it's not so long since you hadn't a been. Or perhaps you prefer us to make a guess as to how you came by your flashy dress. And goodness knows what you had to lose to achieve the price of those splendid shoes. Ava, listen to my report and you'll throw that hussy out of court. You'll pity the husbands of all these bitches when I reveal who wears the breeches. Let every unmarried man take heed and avoid being hooked by one of her breed, or he'll spend his life being bullied and bossed. You can take it from me, for I know my cost. I remember when I was a bachelor, and I wonder now what I married for. I had health and wealth and a reputation. My name was a golden recommendation, treated by the law with unction, asked to every high-class function. People listened when I spoke, and laughed whenever I cracked a joke. What more could I want? I thought I knew, so I married, and landed in a stew. I claimed at the time I did well to win her, plenty of eating and drinking in her. Hair that was curled and soft to touch, a look in her eye that promised much, a laugh that was laced with implication, a figure that offered an invitation. All I craved was to be wed, and then to get her into bed. But the bigger they are, the harder they fall, and my fate has fixed me for good and all. My prayers were answered, to be sure, but I got more than I bargained for. Now I saw all was rightly done, the clergy best our union. I threw a party I'll never forget, and I didn't leave a single debt. And fair is fair, there's none can say that anyone was turned away. The priest who received a handsome fee was pleased as punch, and why wouldn't he be? The guzzling crowds around the table sounded like the Tower of Babel, and the drink it took to stock the bar was enough to float a man of war. A pity indeed that I wasn't drowned at birth, or at least before I found the urge to marry that old crock and make myself a laughing stock. Not that I wasn't tipped the wink about the name she had for drink, and how she'd sleep with anyone, married or single, father or son. For long I wouldn't believe a word, and laughed at everything I heard, till people wondered what I'd do when I found out the tales were true. How right they were, but none can be as blind as him who will not see. I said it was gossip that couldn't be proved until her corset was removed. And I saw that they hadn't exaggerated. To be frank, the position was understated. For contrary to orthodoxy, someone had made me a father by proxy. By proxy. But that wasn't all that happened. I awoke next day with a family. A baby screaming, women prating, my wife in bed recuperating, water on the hob to heat, a bottle fitted with a teat, everyone at action stations, and the midwife directing operations. Around the fire the neighbours gathered, nodding and winking as they blathered, and one was saying as she smiled, "The blessings of God be on the child. Though he's come a wee bit premature, you can see the Dan him for sure. Look at his shape. There isn't a bit that isn't the old man's living split. And there's legs for you, and arms and wrists. Did you ever see such a pair of fists?" Now they said that by natural statistics, the child was blessed with my characteristics. The nose and brow aristocratic, chin determined and emphatic. Even our laughter was compared. Everything I had, he shared. Meanwhile, I hadn't seen his lordship. Exposing him would be too much hardship, and claiming that drafts would kill the mite, they kept him hidden from my sight. I need hardly tell you that by this stage, they had me in a proper rage. I cursed and damned them well and truly, threatening to become unruly, until they gave the child to me with mind he bruises easily. A fall his mother had, I'd say, had brought him on before his day. Don't squeeze him hard and keep him steady. His life is short enough already. 'Tis barely possible with care he'll last until the priest is here. He was bundled in blankets as protection, and I removed them for better inspection. I declared to God, but there on my knees was a bloody pocket Hercules. Shoulders big and wide and square cut. Already he needed a man-sized haircut. His ears were like stales, and his nails were long, and his biceps bulging like King Kong. His nose was thick, and his eyes were cocky. His legs were made for the champion jockey. Matchless in mind and muscle and fiddle and middle, as tough as they come, and as fit as a fiddle. Your worship, there's my tale in brief, and it's up to you to prescribe relief. We need your help and firm decision to save us from our wives' derision. Revise the law of married couples, and grant the married man his scruples. Don't heed the fall in the population or think we're a disappearing nation. You'd see how quickly things improved if some of the obstacles were removed. What need is there for bridal veils and taxis and organs and toppers and tails? What good is all the fuss and racket? Sure, in drink alone you'd save a packet. Besides, there's holy precedent for births that aren't exactly meant. Nothing living can exceed the top-class quality of that breed. I've often seen them, big as horses, mighty limbs and massive torsos. Irrespective of who bears them, plague or sickness never scares them. They're stronger and more fit than many that are legitimate. To prove to you all that I'm far from wrong, I brought my specimen along. He's tough and tawny and full of fight. Has your worship ever seen such a sight? Now doesn't he delight your eyes? He's still a child, but what a size. He isn't a softy, dopey and dumb, but a brute you could use in a rugby scrum. It's easy to tell he wasn't bred from a routine go in a marriage bed. And so, your worship, keep no more a law that myriads deplore. Remove unreal impediments from tinkers, tramps and titled gents. Let the proletariat mate with the aristocrat. Proclaim the news throughout the land that love is free and no longer banned. And soon you'll see a warrior race springing up all over the place, with every man and son and grandson as powerful and strong as Samson. Skies will smile, fish will abound, flowers and trees will smother the ground, and the people will fulfill their function, singing your praises at every junction.
And now, the third part, in which the poet hears further derogatory charges against the male sex in general and the previous speaker in particular.
The girl by now had heard enough, and up she started in a huff. She read your man the riot act, paused for breath, and then attacked.
Lucky, says she, that I've a care for the fact that you're old and a little queer, and that her worship might object, or soon I'd teach you some respect. I'd quickly put you out of action and beat you down to a vulgar fraction, till with a mighty final blow, I'd send you on your way below. It's certain no one takes as true the stories of the likes of you, but still, I'll tell how you behaved towards the girl you say you saved. Reduced to begging from door to door, all she had was the rags she wore. Exposed to every kind of weather, she'd all but reached the end of her tether. Day after day, walking the street, with hardly a drink or a bite to eat. And then this chancer happened by, fooled her up to the ball of her eye, promised her, if she'd be his wife, breakfast and bed for the rest of her life. A separate banking account of her own, a butler, a car, and a telephone. And every month a brand new gown with a country seat and a flat in town. There wasn't a thought in anyone's mind that it could have been love of the dimmest kind would make her consent as long as she'd live. Had she any better alternative? Fat chance there was of a night's high jinks with such a fossilized old sphinx. The saints themselves wouldn't expect a wife to stand for such neglect. From a hog of a husband who nothing would stir to see was she feather, fin or fur. Who lure as she might would never mate her, but lay like a human refrigerator. Not that you set him too great a task. Once a night wasn't much to ask. She did her best to make him play, but there wasn't a move from that lump of clay. I blushed to reveal that he left her languish, gripping the bedpost and sobbing in anguish. What neck he has acting the critic, that leprous, powerless, paralytic. His wife may have fooled him, but didn't he wrong her? And truly now, which of us would have been stronger? Let's hear you dolt your fine defense and see if it makes any sense. Was there anything missing that you can tell? And if not, then, weren't you doing well? Is a house devalued the slightest bit if 20 million inspected it? Don't be afraid, you poor old crock. You wouldn't get in if you should knock. Have you so large an appetite that others shouldn't take a bite? Don't fool yourself. It's plain to see you couldn't exhaust a female flea. Put your illusions well aside unless you want to be certified. And don't be making such a fuss because the woman was generous. She could handle a dozen a day or more and toss you off as an encore. Such jealousy would be no fault in someone who was worth their salt. A lusty lover, a proved romancer, someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. But there's more to fear from the prick of a thorn than from this old cow with this crumpled horn. Another thing I'd like to mention that's beyond my comprehension. Whatever made the church create a clergy that is celibate? The lack of men is a cruel curse just now when things were never worse. I'd give my eyes to have a lover, the ripest though are undercover. It's such a bitter pill to swallow for one like me who hasn't a fella. To see them big and strong of stature, full of charm and bright good nature. Each one seems a fresh young stripling, hard of bone and muscles rippling. Backs as straight as a sergeant major's and desires as keen as razors. They live in the lap of luxury. And what's more, it's all tax-free. Well-dressed, well-treated and well-fed, with warming pans to heat their bed. Man for man, they beat the best, and they're human like the rest. There's many a house that didn't begin to prosper and smile till the priest dropped in. And many a woman could toss her head and boast of the time he blessed her bed. Throughout the land, there's ample proof the church is anything but aloof. And many a man doesn't know that he has a son with a clerical pedigree. But it's a shame the strength and time that they waste on women past their prime, while others miss the best in life because a priest can't take a wife. Just think of the massive population this rule has cost the Irish nation. It's for your honor to decide what's mainly needed, priest or bride. Before your honor now I plead, O prophetess of royal seed, O shining glory of our race, a word from you would solve our case. Weigh up the merits on our side, consider each potential bride, and see how quickly they increase, multiplying like the geese. But is it any use at all to beat our heads against the wall? I see no chance of having fun with men outnumbered 3-1. And since so few can fill the bill, since times are bad and prospects nil, with too much talk from old rapscallions who'd be better off as stallions. And since girls who get the chance must go for anything in pants, give me a man and hold him down, and then just watch me go to town.
And now, the fourth part, in which the poet hears the verdict and is suitably impressed.
Avel arose, all charm and grace, and sunshine seemed to fill the place. Her features had the glow of youth. Her voice was strong, the voice of truth. The bailiff rapped to stop the talk and glared and glowered like a hawk. The chatter slowly died until she spoke, and then the court was still.
My gal, she said, I must declare your treatment has been far from fair. I cannot but be shocked to know our women's plight has sunk so low. Unwanted, haggard, tired, sore, turned away from every door, and that the country's on its ear, exploited by each racketeer. So grab each male who's still unmarried at 21 and have him carried and tied unto the nearest tree and make quite sure he can't break free. Strip him of his coat and shirt and flay him till he's really hurt. Adults who never stood at stud
whose weapon was a perfect dud, who never even tried to use it, never bothered to amuse it, never got their powder hot, just sat upon their balls and shot. Their penance can be settled by the girls whom they left high and dry. Expose them to a roaring fire. Use any methods you desire. You'll pick some tough one, I expect, but go ahead, I'll not object. Wreak vengeance on such useless men. Sudden death's too good for them. We hardly need to pay attention to those who draw the old age pension. They're too weak to show the flag, which hardly has the strength to wag. But from the young take no evasion, make them rise to the occasion. Plenty men fight poverty and still support a family. Their strength and spirit never wilt, they back their wives up to the hilt. They work and play and love and breed, and that's the sort of men we need. I've heard a rumour go the rounds, though not upon the best of grounds, so keep it quiet, do not spread it. No authority has said it. But the church may soon allow the priests to take the marriage vow, and then they'll live life to the full, encouraged by a papal bull. They have the best material for such pursuits venereal, and indeed the merest prick is all they need to do the trick. I think I've mentioned every male that's known unto the social scale. Don't break the rule for anyone, for hangman, half-caste, or right on, but root them out and drive them forth, out of the country or up north. Well, now, I must be on my way. I've much to do and can't delay. I'm sure that you will understand my tour of duty's firmly planned. But I'll return, and then God save the worthless and unmarried knave. And those whose thoughts are mean and low, who tell their pals which girls will go. They think there's no one else on earth who's ever got inside a woman's skirt, nor are they honest Rabelais, but scamps who swim in false self-praise. They talk enough, but how they'd flinch if they but saw a bare square inch. And now I'll have to leave you here, for I'm overdue elsewhere. But have no doubt, I'll make things hum for bachelors when next I come.
I'd listened to her worship speak, and when she stopped, I felt quite weak. My blood grew cold, then hot and fizzy. My head was sick and dizzy. Walls and roof went in and out, while what she'd said rang round about. The ugly bailiff rose in sight, and grabbed at me, and I turned white. She gave my ear a sudden wrench and dragged me up before the bench. The girl who'd made the first protest clapped hands and screamed and beat her chest.
"You fraud," she shouts as up she springs. "I've waited long to clip your wings. You thought you left me on the shelf, but now I have you to myself. And once your head is in my noose, you can pickle your excuse. I know your talent may be small, but did you try it once at all? Inspect him, girls, at your ease. He has the right accessories. Examine what he has to show, from the top of his head to his little toe. Although you'll find some slight misfits, he has a male's prerequisites. His colour's not what you'd expect, and his back is bowed, but I'd not object to taking a fella that has a hump. It's not in his back that he keeps his trump. And often a gaffer with gammy pins becomes the father of quads or quins. There's some dark mystery unknown that's made this blackguard live alone. For lords salute him when they pass, and he has friends in every class. At high-toned functions, he's a guest, and when he's there, they serve the best. He's had enough of selfish pleasure, and now at last we have his measure. His name is one we must applaud, Merriman. But it's a fraud. He must have been baptized in haste, for though he's old, he still is chaste. I'll teach the likes of him a lesson, and I'll suffer no digression. His face provides a full admission, 30 years without coition. Now, me hearties, be prepared. No endeavour must be spared. Recall the times that we were spurned, but here at last, The worm has turned. All hands now, help! Hold down the pup, rope him, tie him up. You heard his punishment announced, so see he's well and truly trounced. Lay into him each time you hit, his bottom's broad enough for it. Just keep on striking where he bends, you'll soon reduce his fat, my friends. Don't weaken, don't be faint of heart. You're not to miss a single part. No better day than this should be. It should go down in history. So write it out, and don't forget, we may be all quite famous yet.
She took her pen. I gave a moan. Her threats had chilled me to the bone. And as she scribbled in a book and eyed me with a dreadful look, I took a breath that was long and deep and closed my eyes. And opened my eyes. I'd been asleep.
Let's hear it for our cast. Here they are now. Kathleen Mcauliffe, Julian Casey, and Kathleen Fee. Thank you all for bringing this piece to life for us on January 6, 2021. A poem from the Ireland of the 1770s by Brian Merriman, translated in the 1950s in Dublin by David Marcus. Its ability to shock and entertain and make us laugh undiminished all down through the centuries. Thank you again to our cast. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you the president of Bloomsday Montreal, Kevin Wright. Kevin is a retired educator. He's been associated with Festival Bloomsday Montreal since the beginnings. He's the leader of the Boaters and Sifters of ALP, which is a Finnegan's Wake reading group in Montreal. He's also a member of Café Gaelach, an Irish language learning group, and Kevin is now president of Festival Bloomsday Montreal. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Dennis, for those very kind words. Court an van Icha, otherwise known as the Midnight Court by Brian Merriman, marks the beginning, as you said, of the opening of Festival Bloomsday Montreal's 10th anniversary. Today is also Nollaig Naman, Little Christmas or Twelfth Night. It marks the end of the Christmas feasting and is celebrated in Ireland as Women's Christmas. To help us understand the importance of this celebration, it's my distinct pleasure to speak with Martina Brannigan. Martina is a woman of many talents. She's fluent in English, Irish, and French. She has a master's degree in French and a licentiate in speech and drama. She's taught Irish at Concordia School of Irish Studies with the Montreal Language Study Circle known as CORA, as well as teachers, adults, and adolescents in Ireland. She works with a few authors and has translated the first 2 volumes of Suzanne Aubry's saga, Fanette, which recounts the story of a family that leaves Cork during the famine. She's a board member of the St. Patrick's Society of Montreal and is the editor of the Society's newsletter, Nuacht, and lends a hand in putting together the newsletter of the Ireland-Canada Chamber of Commerce, the Montreal branch. She has worked with Ericsson and is now the Associate Director of the Office for English Pastoral Services at the Archdiocese of Montreal. Welcome, Martina.
Thank you very much, Kevin. What a fine introduction. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Can you tell us something about the origins of Nollaig Naman?
Nollaig Naman, as you rightly said, is Women's Christmas, and it would be hard to put a precise date on the origins of Women's Christmas, but for sure it's related to Christianity. As you mentioned, the 12th day of Christmas is today, January the 6th, the feast of the Epiphany, the arrival of the Magi, the 3 wise men who followed the star and found the baby in the manger.
What can you tell us about the role of women in Irish society?
Well, women wore many hats, just as they do today. For sure, they were responsible for raising the children and keeping house, and that would have involved cooking. They'd have also helped on the land when required, with sowing and harvesting or cutting the turf, shearing sheep. It really depended on where they lived and what resources the family had. Some would have raised hens for eggs, for eating and cooking, and some of this money they might have even used for their women's Christmas. It would have been a very busy life, revolving around the husband farmer and the large brood of children. Food and feeding would have been central to the work to be done, and the natural light of day would have dictated the flow of their day. These women also might have had some cottage industries involving knitting, weaving, certainly making and darning clothes for their family.
So why was Nolig Naman so important?
Nolig Naman was an opportunity for a husband and his children to recognize the central role of women in ensuring the functioning of the home. This last day of Christmas, the family paid tribute to the woman, or the Irish mammy as she's known, by doing all the housework and the cooking, while the women had time off from all those household duties. And the husband and children would also tidy away any and all the Christmas decorations on this last day of Christmas. And that would normally have had to be done by sundown.
So what would women do then on January 6th? And how has Women's Christmas evolved since the time that it began?
It's believed that originally on Women's Christmas, women would visit each other, probably to share a cup of tea and some cake, to chat and catch up. This evolved over time into potlucks as we know them now, where women would meet in one home, bring food, leftovers to share, and they'd party, dance, play music, tell stories, just be together. Some of these women were in service, and so they wouldn't have had much time off, and this would have been an ideal opportunity to catch up with friends or with family members if they were in the big cities. When women were allowed into pubs, into the snugs, that's the part of the pub for women, they would gather together there and enjoy a night out. And over time, and with the evolving role and wealth of women, these women's gatherings on January the 6th have developed into quite significant events, such as high tea in the afternoon in hotels or sumptuous meals in restaurants to all-night nights on the town. In some places, including among the diaspora, they've become occasions to raise funds for charitable causes, and charitable causes involving the rights of women or supporting women's plights.
What's the connection with the Christian feast of the Epiphany?
That's a very interesting question, Kevin. The Epiphany is the last day of the 12 days of Christmas. This is the day that the three kings from the east who follow the star to where Jesus was, and he was made manifest to them. On that occasion, Christians remember highlights of Jesus's life, from birth through baptism and the marriage at Cana, that first miracle. Within the Christmas season that highlights the role of Mary, Mother of God, and the Holy Family, the 6th of January falls nicely for families and the world as an occasion to manifest the important role of women within the family, providing an opportunity to show gratitude. It's almost a reclamation of our ancient Celtic past, when before a Brehon court, husband and wife stood on equal terms.
Now, why is Epiphany important in James Joyce's writings, especially in the short story, The Dead?
It's believed that Gabriel's aunts hosted the annual party on the last day of Christmas, that is the 6th of January. And at so many levels, the symbols of the Bible story can be found turned on their heads, as James Joyce is wont to do. For example, instead of the three kings, we have the three graces. And then, of course, at the beginning of a new calendar year, people are thinking of change, resolutions. They're probably based on personal epiphanies, revelations that people have. And this story has plenty of epiphanies around love and loss, life and death.
I've heard that one of the famous Irish poets, Sean O'Riordan, wrote a poem entitled Icha Nolig Naman. What does that tell us?
Yes, he did. And that was my first introduction to the tradition of Nolig Naman. It was a poem we studied in secondary school. The title of the poem is Icha Nolig Naman, as you said, and it means Women's Christmas Night or Women's Christmas Eve. And the first verse of this poem alludes to the night of the big wind, as it was known, that described the power of the tornado that ripped through Ireland in 1839, killing about 100 people, wrecking 42 ships, and it left immense destruction of buildings in its wakes. Now, Sean O'Riordan was a religious poet, He loved his mother, and he lived with the ravages of tuberculosis. He lost his father to the disease when he was 10 years old, and he died comparatively young, 60 years of age, and he had suffered from tuberculosis all his life. The second verse of this powerful poem is almost prayer-like in the expression of the poet's desire to go out with a bang rather than to fade away. He didn't want death to steal up on him, but arrive with the great energy of this wind and snuff out his candle, just as was mentioned in the first verse. There's a great short film by Turella Pictures. It's a feminist film, and it uses this poem very cleverly, and I'd recommend it to everybody to watch it. If you go to turellapictures.com and you do a search for Ihe Nullig Naman. I think Senegal showed it a couple of years ago. It's really fantastic. And there's another poet, Colette Negay, and she's written a book of poetry called Ihe Nullig Naman Savosach in the Desert. So it suggests to me that women's Christmas extends beyond just Cork and Kerry to a lot of the Gaeltacht areas around the seaboard of Ireland.
Well, thank you very much, Martina, for your expertise in explaining Nullig Naman. I'm very grateful you helped to shed some light on the themes developed in the Midnight Court and why today was the perfect day for Bloomsday Montreal to present it. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Kevin.
Now, today's production was once a gleam in Kathleen Mcauliffe eye. And with the excellent midwifery skills of Kathleen Fee, it was brought to term today. As the artistic director of Festival Bloomsday Montreal, Kathleen Fee has brought together a very talented and dedicated group of people to breathe life into a story, if you remember, that was composed in 1775. She herself played the role of the gentle narrator, the gruesome bailiff, while also judging the merits of the case as the regal Queen Evil. This triple incarnation was able to deliver her lines, as Hamlet demanded, trippingly on the tongue. Kathleen Mcauliffe, the voice of all the unmarried maidens hard done by, the young men and the married women of her community, embodied the frustration of all those caught in the gears of an unfair system. Julian Casey, the quick change artist, switched from the mild-mannered poet and the old josser, who was also taken advantage by an unfair society. Kate Bevan-Baker and Bùmarang furnished the musical thread that ran through the fabric of this production, whether it was harping on the harpy of a bailiff or fiddling with the facts about how a pocket Hercules came to be born the day after the josser married the jade. Bringing all this together was the ever-patient and insightful Elsa Bolam, whose constantly flowing cataract of ideas kept everyone on an even keel. Now, three other people, almost like the magi of today's feast, who cannot be forgotten are Dennis Trudeau, who acted as our master of ceremonies, Elaine Bander, whose scholarly insights into the context and connection to James Joyce's Molly Bloom sparked some epiphanies, and Edmund Nash, the technological wizard who got us from the page to zoom across the horizon to a new universe on the internet. We also must thank our supporters, Canadian Heritage, the Embassy of Ireland, the Zeller Foundation, the McGill Community for Lifelong Learning, and the generous people who made individual donations to support the work of Festival Bloomsday Montreal. To all these people, and to our audience who spent some time with us today, a warm thank you. Keep an eye on the Bloomsday Montreal website for other events. Oh, excuse me, I have some breaking news that's just come in. Bùmarang presents virtuosic Celtic music infused with many musical flavors from three of Montreal's finest musicians, Dave Gossage on flute, Sarah Paget, harp and vocals, and our Kate Bevan-Baker, fiddle and vocals. Bùmarang, the Scottish Gaelic spelling of boomerang, specializes in a fusion of original compositions and arrangements with Celtic and other traditional music styles. They have been described as a Celtic power trio and are due to launch their debut full-length album with Fallen Tree Records in May of 2021. You can find more information at www.boomerangmusic.com. Interesting news. Anyway, Noleg Chuna Giv. Happy Christmas and a year of health to everyone without COVID-19.
Kevin, thank you very much. Well, this has been a great start to Bloomsday Montreal's 10th anniversary season. Be sure to join us on February 2nd for James Joyce's birthday. We're still trying to figure out how to cut up a virtual birthday cake. We'll have details on our website in the weeks to come at bloomsdaymontreal.com. Thanks again for being with us here. Bye-bye.